We're going to be starting the Majlis in 2 minutes. A request for everybody to come inside. We will be starting shortly.
A little lower. Yeah, like that. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास से बुला लो, मुझे प्यास से सताती है। ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास से बुला लो, मुझे प्यास से सताती है। तुरबत से अली असगर की, तुरबत से अली असगर की आवाज़ ये आती है। ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास से बुला लो, मुझे प्यास से सताती है। याद आए बहुत मुझको तेरा झूला झुलाना है, कभी सीने से लगा के तेरा लोरी सुनाना। जब रेत गरम प्यारी माँ, जब रेत गरम प्यारी माँ मेरे तन को जलाती है, ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास से बुला लो, मुझे प्यास सताती है। हाय प्यास की शिद्दत से गला सूखा पड़ा है, हाय है जख्मी गला उसमें माँ दर्द बरा है। तुरबत में अकेला हूँ मैं, तुरबत में अकेला हूँ मैं, तन्हाई डराती है, ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास से बुला लो, मुझे प्यास सताती है। झूले में परस घर दिन रात है रोया, हाय जब प्यास बुझी इसकी तो फिर चैन से सोया। मकतल में सकीना फिर क्यों, मकतल में सकीना फिर क्यों इस ढूंढने जाती है, ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास से बुला लो, मुझे प्यास सताती है। दरवाजे पे ख़ैमे के एक बीबी खड़ी है, हाय मुर मुर के जो मकतल की तरफ देख रही है। एक खून भरे छोले को, एक खून भरे चोले को आँखों से लगाती है, ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास से बुला लो, मुझे प्यास सताती है। वो शाम गरीबा को अजब जुल्म हुआ था, हाय सर नंगे थी हर बीबी, हर एक खैमा जला था। अब्बास का सानी ज़हरा, अब्बास का सानी ज़हरा है फर्ज निभाती है, ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास से बुला लो, मुझे प्यास सताती है। अख्तर ये हवाओं ने जो पैगाम गमे दिया है असगर तुझे सुगरा ने बहुत याद किया है। एक बार मदीने आओ, एक बार मदीने आओ, बीमार बुलाती है। ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास बुला लो, मुझे प्यास सताती है। तुरबत से अली असगर की, तुरबत से अली असगर की आवाज़ ये आती है। ऐ माँ तू मुझे पास बुला लो, मुझे प्यास सताती है। पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
सलवात।
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद वाले मुहम्मद।
कहती थी रो के मादर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। कहती थी रो के मादर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। रोना न तीर खा कर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। कहती थी रो के मादर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। तौहीद के चमन की अनमोल तुम कली हो, मैदान करबला के तुम आखिरी अली हो। डरता है तुमसे लश्कर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। कहती थी रो के मादर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। तेरी बहादुरी का ये अंग देखने को आए हैं अम्बिया भी, तेरी जंग देखने को। अपने दिखा दे जौहर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। कहती थी रो के मादर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। गाज़ी भी ना रहे हैं, कासिम हुए हैं टुकड़े। बाबा तेरे है तन्हा, हर सू है लाश बिखड़े। बन जा जवाने अकबर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। कहती थी रो के मादर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। रोना ना तीर खा कर, ऐ मेरे लाल असग़र। कहती कहती थी रो के मादर, ऐ मेरे लाल असगर। सलवात। फातिहा। गहवार से हुसैन जो असगर को ले चले, गहवार से हुसैन जो असगर को ले चले, हाथों पे रख के फिदियाए दावर को ले चल, बादल में शाम के माहे अनवर को ले चल, चिल्लाई माँ कहाँ मेरे दिल बर को, चिल्लाई माँ कहाँ मेरे दिल बर को ले, फारिग अभी नहीं हुई अकबर के दाग से, कुछ रोशनी है घर में मेरे इस चिराग से, कुछ रोशनी है घर में मेरे इस चिराग, बानों के इस बयां से घबराए शाहिदी, आखिर करीब फौज के ले आए शाहिद, बच्चे को रख के हाथों पे चिल्लाए शाह, बच्चे को रख के हाथों पे चिल्लाए शाह, यारो समझ लो जो तुम्हें समझाए शाहिद, यारो समझ लो जो तुम्हें समझाए शाहिद, कुछ तो ख्याल चाहिए नन्ही सी जान का, बतलाओ क्या कसूर है इस बेज़बान, बतलाओ क्या कसूर है इस बेज़बान, ये सुन के हुरमला ने उठाया कमान को, ताका खता शेयार ने नन्ही सी जान, मारा खदम शाह के अब रो कमान, हाय हाय मिटाया बानों के नामो निशान, हाय हाय मिटाया बानों के नामो निशान, चिल्लाई मौत आए ना तुझको अमान दी, बच्चे ने सैम सैम के हाथों पे जान दी, बच्चे ने सैम सैम के हाथों पे जान दी, पहुँचे गरस के था दर खैमा का मालज़ार, आई जो बानो देखे के शर्माए बार बार, गर्दन झुका के कहने लगे शाहे नाम, लो शेर बानो बन गया असगर का भी मज़ा, लो शेर बानो बन गया असगर का भी मज़ा, नासूर पर गया है दिल दर्दनाक में, बानो तेरी कमाई मिली आज खाक में, बानो तेरी कमाई मिली आज खाक में, बानो वो तेरा हसलियों वाला गुजर गया, बानो वो तेरी गोद का पाला गुजर गया, बानो वो तेरे घर का उजाला गुजर गया, बानो वो तेरा हसलियों वाला गुजर गया, बानो वो तेरा हसलियों वाला गुजर ने, अब वो चौंकते हैं ना हरदम चलते हैं, फिर दोस्त में वो हूरों की गोदी में पलते हैं, फिर दोस्त में वो हूरों की गोदी में पलते हैं, गहवार से हुसैन जो असगर को ले चले।
Assalamu alaikum. Please let's begin with a loud salawat. I have a few announcements today to begin with parking, especially for those of you who are listening from YouTube or listening from the car or on your way to Husaini. Parking is available not only in our lot, but the adjacent lot. There's also parking available on Burdett, and there's also parking available on Easy Street. We are working on arrangements for a shuttle, but there is no shuttle as of right now, but we have plenty of parking available. Moving on, it is important to remember that the parking volunteers that are standing outside and coordinating the parking, that they are not inside listening to the Majlis so that we can be inside and park comfortably and have parking. So it's a small request from everyone. Please comply with the parking team. Please be polite to them. Please comply with them. They are working our best to get everyone in parking, and they're being fair. So please just work with the parking team. Moving on, there will be a julus, inshallah, on Ashra. It's going to be at 10 a.m. And parking vouchers will be available. Parking vouchers will be $10. For those of you who want to go from Husaini, there will be a bus available, but just like every year, it's first come, first serve. So please make sure you're here on time. And Amal Ashura will start at 8 a.m. that day. Moving on, so we're going to have our annual fundraiser on 8th of Muharram. But I don't have to explain the significance of tonight. Tonight is 6th Muharram. And I ask everybody here humbly to please, it takes literally 15 seconds to take that initiative, to go to IECHUSAINI.org or use Zelle to send a donation to IECZPay786@hotmail.com. As we know, we have programs throughout the year, and we have a full lineup this year in Muharram and Safar, and all these programs have a cost to them. And it is our responsibility. Like I mentioned last night, we have $500,000 loan that we still have to pay off. So please take that initiative. But we were going to do a full fundraising on 8 Muharram during the Majlis. There is a Sabil of Imam Hussain in the parking lot, so please take a moment to visit the Sabil. Tonight, the Tabud, the cradle of Hazrat al-Yazkar will be taken out. So I ask all the children here who want to participate to please, when the Masayib starts, to go towards the back to take part, and all for the fathers here, if you want to send your children, to have them line up in the back so that they can take part in that. Lastly, as I'm mentioning every night, please wear your mask at all times. And if you have been in contact with anyone with COVID, please contact the management. We're going to maintain full confidence. It's just for the protection of everyone. Now, before I begin, I don't want to delay the Majlis anymore. I'm going to ask tonight, there's even a bigger need. It's a big night. So there's going to be plenty of people coming. And again, the last few nights, we've had people sitting outside the hall because they couldn't find a way outside the hall. So I'm going to ask everybody at this line, everybody, if you guys can come forward as close as here to this line. Everybody in the back, in the middle. Loud salvat. Jazakallah. And without further delay, I'd like to request Maulana Syed Ali Abbas Razawi to recite the Majlis.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أما بعد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم. Our series of discussions have gone into a seventh night. Yesterday we were looking at those factors that block us from the truth. You see, within the last days, there's a particular tradition, not just within Islam, but across faiths, the Abrahamic faiths, that the last periods before the coming of the Messiah will be a time of confusion. As the hadith says, it will be the time, this time will be of hayra, bewilderment, a ghaiba of the Imam. And in this way, this time will be a time of trial and tribulation, much test. And you notice as well, as time begins to go, the best example I can give you is this. When you go on top of a mountain, you chuck a stone. When the stone begins to fall, at the beginning the speed isn't very fast. But as it begins to decrease, the speed begins to increase very fast until it hits the ground. Similarly, that is the example of time, in this time, in the last days. And you find that bewilderment, butlan, many batils will exist. That it will be difficult for people to know the truth. And so when the issue of truth and falsehood becomes clouded, what you see is that it becomes difficult for the people and they start losing tawfiq, and at the same time they start losing barakah. You see, when things become clouded, when you don't know what the truth is, you cannot completely appreciate the light. And the light is the light of wilayah. But remember one thing, as per the tradition of the Prophet, that when he said there is one truth and there's one falsehood, but in Akhir Zaman, there will be one truth but many falsehoods. So one of the companions began to cry. He says, Ya Rasulullah, on that day, how are we going to differentiate the truth? He says, the truth is going to be like the sun in the sky. But you've got to unprogram yourself first. Today, look at this. You've been told to give tarbiyah to your children. But today, you're not giving tarbiyah to your children. WhatsApp is giving tarbiyah to your children. Social media is giving tarbiyah to your children. The minute that they're 7, 8, 10 years old, you give them an iPhone. And from that iPhone, they're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. What we said yesterday, where we concluded yesterday, was this: that you'll find that in this time of Hira, what happens is that the entire nizam of family will be destroyed. In fact, today I was looking, Malahim wal Fitan, about the last days. That there's a book talking about those trials and tribulations which will come in the last day. If you look at the vast majority of ahadith in that, you find that it's got to do with destruction of the family system. That when you find that the family system begins to destroy itself, or begins to separate, and we'll look at it in a minute how, what you find is that fitan begins to spread. As in fitna begins to spread. Malahim. You find that much tragedy begins to come on people and they don't realize it. You know the first thing it says is, look at this and see. Honestly, open your eyes up and see which direction you're going in. This is why when they say Dajjal comes with that which is mubah. He doesn't come with that which is haram, because he knows you're not going to go towards haram. He said this is mubah. From that mubah, he's able to shift your entire mind away from tawheed. And today you're finding that. You're finding a community of people who are materialistic. You're finding that we don't have our priorities straight. We're finding that love that Rasulullah says, إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي Quran says this, not even me. Today it's not just about Shias commemorating Imam Hussein. That's not the case. You know people who are coming in our Majlis, who are listening to our Majlis on a daily basis. There's Sunni there. There's Ahmadiyya there as well. They've told me that they're listening to it as well. There's others, Ismaili, who are listening. There are Bohras who are listening. Why are these people listening? Because the Quran says, Ajr of the Prophet, if you want to give Ajr, is what? إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. He doesn't want anything. He wants love. Mawadda. Mawadda is an active form of love. You walking to this Majlis is you showing your active form of love, as stated in the Quran, to Rasulullah and his family. So this is not restricted only. This is why we don't come here in the 10 days of Muharram and we don't turn anyone away. We don't talk about polemical issues to say that you're bad and he's bad and she's bad and everybody else is bad. We're not here for that. We're here to say, listen, Hussein is good. If you come to Hussein, then you're good. I don't need to tell somebody you're right and you're wrong. All I need to say to them is, this is Hussein. You jump onto the bandwagon of Hussein. Even if you're John the Christian, you become alayhi salam. Even if you're John the Christian, you become alayhi salam. Even if you're Hur, you become alayhi salam. On the 8th of Muharram, if anybody was to ask you, where would Hur be if he was to die on the 8th of Muharram? Every single person would say hell. What changes him? Sayyid al-Shuhada. What is the spark? That spark needs to be there. If there's one thing you can instill in your children, look, many people come and they say, our sons don't pray. Do a lecture on prayers. Do a lecture on fasting. Do a lecture on Hajj. This, that, the other. So listen, brother, there's not enough time in the day. Let me just give lecture on one thing and it's sufficient. Everything else will take care of itself. You know what that is? Wala amir al-mu'mineen. Once that is there, once the bunyad of wilayah, once the foundation of wilayah is there, everything begins to grow from that. You know why? Because Ali ibn Abi Talib was born in the Kaaba and died in the Mihrab. Salah straight away, bang. He was in the state of fasting. Straight away fasting comes. He's the one who went on Hajj and he's the one who gave zakat when in rukuh. You want to learn Islam? Look at who for the verses of the Quran were revealed for. There is no one in the Quran that the Quran itself says that he gave rukuh, or he gave zakat while in rukuh. The only person in the Quran that every Sunni and Shia says is when Ali was in rukuh, praying and giving his ring in terms of zakat. You want to understand fiqh, you want to understand sharia, you want to understand goodness, you want to understand righteousness, go to the door of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Why? Because Rasulullah himself said, Bukhari is the book, look inside it and see, Ana Madinatul Ilm wa Aliyun Babuha. That's why. Look, I'm not here to discuss the politics. Who the political leader was, I couldn't care less at this stage. Was it Ali? Was it Fulan? Was it Fulan? All I know is this. My leader who spiritually refines me, as per the call of the Prophet, he says, go to the door, Ali. When you enter that door, you come to my Medina. If you love me, love Hussein. If you love me, love Fatima. If you love me, love Hassan. If you love me, follow them. And Allah says, if you love me, in kuntum tuhibbun Allah, fattabi'uni, yuhbibkum Allah. Who do you follow? The Prophet. Allah says, you love me, it's not enough just to love me. Because there's many people who claim to worship Allah, but Allah says you have to follow the Prophet. So automatically, second stage comes in. And then the Prophet says, listen, it's not just enough to follow me. You've got to have mawadda with my loved ones. Now, qurba, there's a discussion on this. In Sunni and Shia tradition, qurba means two different things. In Sunni tradition, qurba means Fatima. Jalaluddin Sayyuti, look at it and see. What's qurba? Fatima. Makes it even better. Ask yourself the question, is the haqq of Fatima being given? If the haqq of Fatima is not being given, then you're not doing justice to qurba. As I said, I'm not here for a polemical discussion, nor do I want to go into it. The reason why I say all of these things is for one reason. In Akhir al-Zaman, hold on to the rope of Ahlul Bayt. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Quran is saying, hold on to the rope and don't make sects. Hablullah is who? Ahlul Bayt. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Don't divide. Don't make sects. Don't branch out into different sects. Quran is saying, don't branch out into different sects. If somebody asks you what you are, what are you? Muslim. What is the condition of it? What is the criteria? Rasulullah, Ahlul Bayt. Right? As long as you hold on to Ahlul Bayt, you won't divide. Who says that? I'm saying that? I'm not saying that. Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam is saying that. Where is she saying that? Go to the khutbah Fadaq. Open it up, what does she say? It says that the reason why Ahlul Bayt's ata'ah is important is that for as long as you follow us, you will not divide. And the minute that you leave us, you'll divide into sects. If today Islam is divided, it's because they've left the rope of Ahlul Bayt. So look, coming back to what I wanted to say. Coming back on track, steering back on track. In this day and age, what's important? Important is in times of fitna, go back to the teaching of Ahlul Bayt. As I said, in our hadith corpus, it says when Dajjal comes, he comes from that which is mubah. He comes from that which is mubah. Dajjal's purpose is to remove you from Tawheed. And Tawheed begins from making your mind confused that you can't focus. From then you find that you're shifting. For 2 seconds you can't even sit there. Notice and see. You're sitting there, you can't have a conversation without a brother looking at his phone. You know why that is? Because he's programmed. Honestly, I tell you, I wish we had the Sabbath like the Jews do for 25 hours that everybody has to shut their phone off. Then you'd have to focus. Why is this important though? Let me come on to it now. Slowly I'm going to build up to this. In our traditions, on Malahim wal Fitan, the biggest thing that you're going to find in the last days in our community is divorce. It's going to increase. Now look, I'm not here saying, giving a moral judgment whether something is right or wrong. All I'm saying is that the tradition is saying that there will be many divorces. Then the second condition, or the second quality or criteria you could say, that you're going to find in the last days is this. Believe it or not, the second one is this. That there will be separation, or you could say disowning of parents with their children. So there will be more children disowned. But there's a second thing as well that the tradition says. It says, and children would also disown their parents. Today, look at it and see. How many children are not speaking to their fathers or mothers, and how many mothers and fathers are not speaking to their children? Now, why is this important? Why has the hadith pointed this out? For one reason, because there is great barakah when a family comes together. There's great barakah in the family unit. Allah has created it like that. This is why Ahlul Bayt is emphasized so much. Rasulullah emphasizes his family because he's giving you a sunnah. The family is that each one of you need to have your nucleus as a family as well and keep it together. It shouldn't be divided. Now look, let's take it a step further. What else does it say? It says that there will be many people who will be cutting ties of the womb with their relatives. Brothers will not speak to sisters. Sisters will not speak to brothers. Uncles will not speak to, and etc. You know what that means. But you know what the punishment for that is? Hadith says, we will diminish their life. We will I've seen with my own eyes 7 brothers who were fighting. Two of them weren't. 7 of them were. I think there were 9 brothers in total. All 7 of them are dead before their 60th birthday, and the 2 who weren't fighting are in their 80s now. Why is that? Because there are categories where Allah decreases your life. If you disrespect your parents and you break off from your parents, or if your parents disown you or you break off from them and they're not happy, Allah decreases your life immediately. Let me give you an example. Mutawakkil Abbasi was a mal'oon. He demolished the grave of Imam Hussein at least 7 or 8 times. The famous tradition says that he said that, look, we want to burn the grave of Imam Hussein. We want to take his body out and burn it. So he knew no Muslim was going to do it. So he went to a Christian. He says, it doesn't mean anything to you. Why don't you go underground and burn it? They say that when he went underground, he came out crying. He says, what are you doing? Who you asked me to burn? Whose grave? One time he asked people to deflect the river Euphrates so that it can go over the body of Imam, over the grave. In the tradition it says it came in a split. Even water, remember, Furat is the water of Wilaya. You find that the Umayyas live more around the Dajla, traditionally, in the Hadith it says. The water is salty. Furat's water is sweet. This is why it's mustahab. After Abbas looked at the water, it became mustahab for every child when they're born to have a little bit of Furat. This is why when a child is born, you take a drop and you put it in the child's mouth. Because Furat is the river of Wilaya. Right? So Furat is not going to do anything which is against Sahib Amr. So anyhow, that mutawakkil one day does something, and I can't even say it on the minbar. He insults the mother of Hussein. So when he does that, his son can't take it. His son comes to the 10th Imam. He says, is my father wajib al-qatl? He says, yes. He says, can I kill him? He says, no. You can't kill him. He says, why? He says, because you're his son. If I kill my father, is there going to be a sin on me? He says, no. But Allah has created a nizam. If you violate that nizam, Allah will decrease your life. He went and killed his father. Within 60 or 70 days, he died as well. Why? There's a nizam which has been created. So therefore, be very vigilant how you talk to your parents. Because remember one thing, even after their death, they can disown you. A Shia is a person who does what? Who's very cautious when it comes to observation of relations. This entire Karbala is a movement of relationships. In the most severe moments, you don't see the akhlaq of Ali Akbar move. Look, how many people, when they get stressed out, they say to their fathers, Dad, just leave me alone. I've had a busy day. What are you talking about? What have you done? What have you done? You've brought bala onto you. You don't realize, but in ways you've done that. I'll give you another example. They said that one man went to Ayatollah Nukudik Isfahani. He says, oh, I need a dhikr. I'm poor. Nukudik, he gave him something. For the first time, it didn't work. He went elsewhere, it didn't work. He went to another guy, it didn't work. Finally, he comes to the sahn of the 8th Imam, Imam al-Rida, alayhi salam. And there was a man sitting there. The man looks up and says, what's the problem? He says, I've done everything. Rizq isn't coming to me. He says, come here. He says, have you got the haqq of anyone on your shoulders? On your neck? He says, not that I remember. He says, have you cut your relationships with your family? He says, no. He says, is your mother happy with you? He looked and he said, I think she should be, and then he remembered. He said, no, there was an incident that took place. He said, what's that incident? He said, the incident was this. One day, my wife and my mother were having an argument. My wife and my mother were having an argument. I knew my mother was wrong. So I said to my mother, you're wrong. Instantly I realized my mother's got offended. I apologized to her there, but it seems like she's kept it in her heart. The lesson was this, listen. When two people that you have rights or have rights over you, your wife has a right, your mother has a right. Don't ever interfere in the discussion. In that circumstance, if you're going to say to somebody one is wrong or the other, take him to the side, take him to the corner, take him in private. Because every human being has an ego. That mother felt insulted. This Arif says, now go to your mother and apologize to her properly. He said, but she was wrong. He says, she may be wrong, but she's your mother, she got offended. You should never ever say something in front of somebody. If they're wrong, let it go, but later on explain to them, listen, mum, you were wrong, or wife, or father, or husband, whatever it may be. He went to his mother, kissed her on the hands, kissed her on the feet, says, mother, forgive me. She says, now I forgive you. Son, you insulted me in front of your wife. That pain remained in my heart. When that mother forgave him, the rizq started to come. All right? Remember this. So this is why I'm saying, you've got relationship which you have to observe, uphold. The smallest thing. And it doesn't matter whether your mother's a Muslim, non-Muslimah, whatever it is. The fact is you've got relationship that you've got to uphold. You can't turn around and say, oh no, but she doesn't follow my faith. It's not the case. This world is a world of cause and effect. What you get, what you put in, what you're going to get back. I'll give you another example, right? Now that we're on this discussion. Ayatollah Sayyid Jamaluddin Gulpaygani says, he says, right, so if you've been to Isfahan, there's a graveyard known as Taht Fulat, where many of the awliya are buried. You'll find waliullahs everywhere over there, awliya Allah buried there, the saints. And he would take a room, right? So he took a room. And he took a room for himself and he used to worship there. He says, one day I saw that this group of people came, there was a body. And they asked me, they said, look, Sayyid, can you come in, can you recite the prayers? He said, I recited the prayers, I put the body in the ground. He said, when I started reciting the talqeen, I could see that this boy was having difficulty replying. He couldn't reply. So I looked around and I saw mothers crying. Mother was crying. He says, I can't speak to the mother. The father was sitting there quietly. He goes up to him and he says, listen, your son is not reciting back. What have you done? What has he done? He goes, no, my son was a great person, but there was one issue. He became a scholar. He used to sit on the mimbar and used to ask people, or used to answer people's questions. One day I raised a question and he would say to me, look, sit down, you're jahil, don't ask this question. He goes, because of that, it broke my heart. He says, now your son is adab. This is not the time to hold this. Let it go. He lifted his hands, the father. He lifted his hands and said, Allah, I'm satisfied with my son. It was a small mistake he made. Generally, he was a very good boy. Please forgive him. They say Jamaluddin Gulpaygani went to the body again. Now when he recited, he saw the son was smiling, replying. The angels of Rahmah were coming. That is how simple it is to destroy your akhirah. That's how simple it is. I'm not talking just to you, I'm talking to myself. Because obviously, none of us are born through immaculate conception. We all have parents. We all have a responsibility to them. And why do you think that the Quran says that don't even say uff to your parents when they're old? Why uff? Because Quran knows that when your parents get old, they become, like it says, they go backwards. They're going to irritate you. So when you're irritated, what comes out? Uff. So don't even show irritation to your parents. Because if you show Quran is saying they will be like that. They are going to go in reverse. They are going to sometimes wind you up. Sometimes they may be demanding. Sometimes they may ask you questions, which you may feel that's a stupid question. But if you disrespect them, then you're finished. So be very vigilant of the relationship that you have. And always remember that tomorrow you're going to be there as well. And today you think you're strong and you're big and you've got strength and you've got money and all that, you think that your father was born old with his back bent and a white beard? Okay, fine, some of us color our hair. But the fact of the matter is this. A time is going to come where your back is going to be bent and you're going to start getting hair loss. And you're going to put on a bit of a belly because your metabolism weakens. And then as you go on, you won't be able to walk properly. And at that moment, you're going to want your son to hold you by your arm and take you. Don't you remember that story of the Prophet? What story of the Prophet? That story of the Prophet, when that father was kicked out by his son went to the Prophet of God and complained about his father. And when he complained about his father, the Prophet of God says, bring your father. At that moment, Wahi comes, Jibreel comes down. Jibreel says something. Jibreel says, that father, when he was told by his son that you're calling him, there was an ah. The father's ah had a lot of words. The father was saying something to himself. He was saying that, son, when you were born, I would clean your rubbish. I would wake up at night time. I would go to work just for you. I would feed you and I would stay hungry. And as you started to grow strong, I became weaker. And as your back strengthened, my back bent. I was looking for a time to come where you would grab me by the arm and take me. But that time hasn't come. If you don't look at me as a father, at least look at me as a good neighbor of yours. He was heartbroken. They say when this man comes to Rasulullah with his father, Rasulullah told him to go away. He says, how can you? Why? Because Rasulullah is rahmatul alameen, this father is old. So look, be very vigilant when it comes to your fathers. Be very careful when it comes to your mothers, right? So anyhow, to come back to what I was saying, this time of fitan is a time. You'll find bala will fall onto the community. So the first thing is this, as I said, you find divorce rates will increase. And look, remember one thing. I'm not here to give a moral judgment. But what I am here to say is this, to be vigilant of your responsibility to each other. Look, remember this, there was a great scholar that got divorced. So when he was going through trial and tribulation, they said, what's the problem? He said, I can't tell you because she's my wife. There's a confidentiality. When they got divorced, they came again and said, now she's not your wife. What happened? He says, I can't tell you now because she's not mahram to me anymore. What does that mean? That means dignity even within disagreement. Right? Dignity within disagreement. Remember all of these things. These are akhlaqi things. Don't ever take it to the extent that you hate someone so much so that there's no dignity in the disagreement. If you can't get along, then quietly separate. But don't make a complete facade out of it, that in the community and society as such. Be mature adults, and I know situations become very bad. But we can only advise. If it becomes very bad, fine. We're no one to say, you know your situation better than anybody else. But look, relationships is important. It isn't just a relationship of a man and a woman, but then you've got the children, you've got the grandparents. There's an entire system in play, which needs to be respected. First thing. Second thing is this. Your relationship between husband and wife is important. Now look, I wasn't going to mention this, but the reason I'm going to mention this now is because of this. When a man disrespects his wife, in the barzakh, his torture and punishment increases. Look at what the hadith says. Hadith says when a man helps his wife, 1 hour of helping your wife is like an entire year of worship. Your sins are wiped out. Now the hadith says, if there's love, when you sit down with your wife or your husband and you have a conversation, if you sit down and have a conversation even for half an hour, Rasulullah himself has said that this is better than doing ittiqaf in my masjid. Why? Because the nucleus of the family is becoming stronger. So this is why it's good. Go out with your wife, spend time with your spouse. Second thing. One thing I've mentioned, but now look at the second thing. In one tradition it says, and there's muta'addid traditions like this, multiple traditions, tawatur traditions on this. It says that when a wife, She sees that her husband is working hard, and out of love she gets him a glass of water. It's just water in the hadith. Allah writes for her 500 years of worship. That she was in the daytime fasting and at the nighttime worshipping. Similarly, when a man, and the hadith it says Ali ibn Abi Talib was helping Zahra alayhi salam clean the lentils. Rasulullah was so overjoyed to see this taking place that he began to recite the fadail of Ali. But the one thing he said was, which is quite pertinent, is this, that if a husband helps his wife, Allah removes his major sins. So look, in both ways, you've got to observe the ties relationship there. This isn't a relationship whereby you're aggressive or angry. The most important thing is love. Let me take it a step further, right? And it's technical. You know why? Today we're going to mourn over Ali Asghar. For this reason, this has come into my mind. It's important, right? What is Ali Asghar the epitome of? His cradle symbolizes family. His cradle symbolizes Ahlul Bayt, all of them as a nucleus coming together. The family has three qualities to it, remember this, for a human being. The first quality is that in your home you worship. So there's worship in home. The second quality is this, spiritual exercise. A person who gets married, man tazawwaja faqad ahraza nisfa dinah. Half of his faith is secure. Why half of his faith? Because you're spiritually benefiting, all your vices are coming out. You take the person closest to you for granted. You're respectful to the outsider, but when you see your spouse, you mouth off. The minute that happens, you should recognize this is a vice. That vice has taken me to darkness, moving me away from wilaya. At this point, you're meant to do tawassul to the imams. At this point, you say to Rasulullah, Ya wajihan indallah shfa'alana indallah. At that point, you say, help me. At that point, Ahlul Bayt are meant to be there to grab you by the hand and to remove that vice inside of you. You see now where tawassul is important. People ask, why do you guys believe in tawassul? Because the imams of Ahlul Bayt are our spiritual guides. You don't need to go to some murshid or some sheikh or otherwise. You go directly to Rasulullah and his family. They'll take you by the hand for free and take you up. Right? Remember that, bear that in mind. Look, my discussion wasn't going to be this. But now that it's come, let's finish it. Third thing which is important is tarbiyah. Remember, house is a place of tarbiyah. Today when you sit your kids down in front of the television, when you sit your kid, well, it's not television anymore. It's all the other gadgets. Who's giving your kids tarbiyah? Are you giving them or the gadgets are giving them? The gadgets are ultimately these 10-minute clips on Facebook and social media and so forth. They're conditioning the minds of your children so they don't know what haqq is and what batil is. This is what you call Dajjal. When people talk about the system of Dajjal, it's in front of you now. This, what I'm looking at, is a double-edged sword. It can be used for correctness, it could be used for impurity. We're looking at a double-edged sword. Therefore, believe me, it's not long when the entire bab of fiqh is going to talk about social media, because there requires a bab now. There requires ijtihad on this. But be very vigilant. As much as possible, have the human touch with your kids. Because remember this, when Dajjal saw that I cannot separate families because they sit together, he thought chuck in an iPhone or an Android and you'll see they'll be sitting together, but what they'll be doing is they'll be having conversation on the phone. What this does is it removes the human touch. The minute it does that, certain barakah is lifted. Immediately certain barakah is lifted. And so then what happens? Peace starts slowly leaving the family. Islam tells you to eat together. We're eating in separate rooms. Your fifth imam says that you should be praying together. To the extent that if you have a very big problem, look, I'm sitting here. I can see around me that there's more than 40 people. If I have a problem today, I should be able to say to you, brothers and sisters, I'm going to do dua, you say Ameen. Allah says if 40 people gather, Allah will accept that dua. Why do you think when we come to a majlis, we ask Allah to accept our duas when we're crying for Hussein, for Sayyidul Shuhada? Because that's the time of istijabat of dua. Go recite a salawat, please. If brothers can recite a salawat in the old hall and all of you can come forward, please. There's people who are standing outside, there's people in the car park. If all of those brothers who are sitting in the old hall, please, if you can come as forward as possible The management has said to me to ask everyone to come as far forward as possible. Yesterday and the last couple of days, there have been people standing outside. So please, with a loud salawat, if all of you can come as forward as possible. And one more salawat, please. And one more salawat, please. You see, look, Islam is a way of life. Islam is a way of life. It's a way of muhabba. It's the way of love. It's unfortunate today that we teach our children straight away, Allah is going to grab you. So-and-so is going to come and kill you. So-and-so is going to come and do... That's not the way. Ahlul Bayt always loving, caring, compassion, kindness. For children, teach them compassion and kindness. If you want to teach wrath of Allah, yes, Allah is Jabbar. Teach them later, when this is working. Not when they're children. When they're children, the most important thing is love. However, you could say aggressive a child becomes, always treat them with love, with compassion, with kindness. Because when love goes into a person, you'll find that they become stronger. But look, to come back, some of our greatest scholars and some of our greatest people have gained maqamat because they've observed the rights of the family. I'll give you an example. Look at the Quran and see. Fir'aun has a wife, the Pharaoh. That wife's name is Asiya. You know, Asiya was only in her 20s when abuse started happening to her. She never violated the haqq of anyone around her. But her patience led her to that maqam, that from the four of the greatest women on earth, that is one of the greatest women. Why? Patience. Similarly, to give you an example, I've told you about Ayatollah Qadi, Said Ali Qadi Tabatabai. He had a student. So listen to this. Had a student by the name of Said Hashim Haddad. If you're from Karbala, you'll know him, Said Hashim Haddad. Said Hashim came to Qadi and he said, I'm going through a lot of difficulty in my household. He said, I want to divorce my wife. He says, why? He says, because my mother-in-law is continuously abusing me. Said Qadi says one thing. He says, sabr. Hashimi Haddad went like this. Remember, we learn from Ahlul Bayt that when a spiritual master gives you the advice, that's it. When he says it, you do it. We learn this from Ahlul Bayt. And here, these are the servants of Ahlul Bayt. Some of them are, see, in the tradition it says that there are continuously 30 people with the 12th Imam. Their life is like mine and yours. When one dies, another one is replaced. Now that I'm on this, I'll mention the story. One of them, if you remember, in Qom, in the last days was a guy called Ja'far Mujtahidi. Ja'far Mujtahidi was from the 30 people of the 12th Imam. Right? One dies, another one is replaced. Had hair down to there. Nice big beard. Looked like a dervish. His signature was Ya Ali. But he was one of the 30 of the 12th Imam. Said Tabatabai says, Dr. Tabatabai, who's in this day and age is in Tehran at the moment, is a doctor. At the time he says I was in Germany and I was there doing my, you could say his, when a doctor is training, it slips my mind what the word is. If one of you can remember, tell me. What is it known as? Residency, that's right. So here the doctor is doing his residency in Germany. It's a really good word, that is. Residency, right? So he's doing his residency in Germany. He's alive today. He says, and Ja'far Mujtahidi maybe died about, 15, 17 years ago? He got a letter. That letter was from Ja'far Mujtahidi. He says, son, can you come to so-and-so location? I'm over there. This guy's thinking, man, Ja'far Mujtahidi had a stroke. He's paralyzed. What's he going to be doing in Germany? What's the story here? He says, this is the exact person, eyewitness account. He says it was a cold day and I went there. When I went there was a small mountain and you had to drive up. And it was very difficult, so I was thinking of walking. And at the top I saw Ja'far Mujtahidi was there. He says, say Ya Ali and come to the top. He said, I said, Ya Ali, became easier, went to the top. He goes, when I got there, I went into a house and I saw that there was a woman, old lady, German lady, and she was running around Ja'far Mujtahidi. And at that moment, I saw a young man who I could see has just recovered from illness. So I asked her, I said, look, I said in German, I said, look, what's the story here? She replied, she says, my son had cancer and he was dying. My son was so sick that I knew he was going to die. She said, I didn't have anyone else. I don't have anyone. My husband has died. I don't have any brothers, sisters. So I was very upset. But I'm a believer. I'm a Christian. I'm a Catholic. So because of that, she said, one night I said, Lady Mary, I've lost everyone. I only have one son. Imagine, the love of a son doesn't change in 1400 years. She says, I've only got one son. I'm an old woman. I can't live without my son. In the next couple of nights, you'll see there's a lady called Layla. She says the same thing. I said, son, without you, I can't live. Mother's nature doesn't change in 1400 years. She says, she looks up and she says, look, I can't live without my son. I was calling Mary, calling her. That night when I went to sleep, I saw a dream. In that, Lady Mary came. She says, please save my son. Lady Mary replies, she goes, I can't do that. She says, what do you mean you can't do that? Your son raised the dead. Can you not help my son? She says, no. Because in this day and age, Sahib-e-Amr is the final prophet. Sahib-e-Amr is the son of Fatima. So she remembered, she says, who is it? He says, that person is called the Mehdi. So she begins to recite, Muhammad, Fatima, Mehdi. Muhammad, Fatima, Mehdi. Muhammad, Fatima, Mehdi. She wakes up in the morning, there's a knock on the door. She opens it. She says, this old man with long hair, this one that you're seeing with a long beard, he walked into the house as if he knew what my house was. He walked all the way to where my son was lying. He put his hand under his back and he said something very loud. And when he said that something very loud, my soul shook. I thought, what is this guy? What is she saying? What is he saying? And then right after that, I saw that my son got up. So when Ja'far Mujtahidi went out, right, Ja'far Mujtahidi went out, so Dr. Tabatabai says, I went followed him. I said, Doctor said to him, he said, Sheikh Ja'far, what did you say? What was that final thing that you said? He said, I said, Ya Ali, Karish Tamam Shud. He said his entire thing was finished. All I needed to say was, Ya Ali. His aqidah was in Imam Ali. Why? Because the Prophet of God himself said, Nadi Aliyan Madhar al-Ajaib. Don't ever forget the power of that man who's been there, who is the savior of the prophets. Look, I wish I had time to go into it. But whenever a prophet was, let me give you a, now that we're on it, if you don't mind me going a bit over time, recite a salawat. I'll give you the reference. Allama Mustambit and Al-Qatra narrates, the same tradition is also found in Masharik al-Anwar and is found also, you can find it in Basair. So basically, the tradition goes like this. It says that one day a creature comes to Rasulullah. As the creature comes to Rasulullah, he's having a conversation. In the meantime, a young man comes. When that young man comes, this creature shrieks and all of a sudden it begins to shrink. Now the creature was from the jinn, and he comes to Rasulullah and says, please save me from this man. He said, what was the problem? He says, I remember on the Ark of Noah. He goes, because of the jinn, he was from the shaitan. He said that I was damaging or wanting to damage the Ark of Noah. He says, when I was doing that, this young man came and he chopped my hands off. He goes, I'm scared of this young man. A similar tradition with Sulaiman and others. I'm not going to go through the tradition. The one thing is this, the primordial light of Ali's always been there. Where do you find it in the Bible? In the Bible, when they're called Aliyah. Who is Aliyah? When Imam Ali, so they say in the Bible, if you look at it, that no prophet was in trouble, but they called Ali and he came to help. Where do you find Aliyah? Sunni Shia traditions both say in the Battle of Khaybar, when they asked, they said, who are you? He, Amir al-Mu'mineen, no, people have claimed to be the final prophet. So when Jesus, if you look at the New Testament, when they asked him, are you the final prophet? He says, no. He says, are you Aliyah? He says, no. He said, the Masih says, yes. Right? Final prophet has come. Masih has come. When Amir al-Mu'mineen is standing there, he says, oh people, that Aliyah is me. I'm the one who helps Adam, and I help Nuh and Ibrahim and so forth, right? That is who Aliyah is. Even if Aliyah becomes old, Aliyah still remains Aliyah. Where do you see that? Battle of Siffin takes place. The sons of Amir al-Mu'mineen alliance, each one of them are fighting in the Battle of Siffin. A time comes where Amir al-Mu'mineen himself says, he says, now I'm going to go into the battlefield and fight. At that moment, Malik said, he said, Mawla, your beard is white, your eyes are white, your hair is white, you're going into the battlefield? At that moment, the Shamis were saying, who's Haydar? Who's Haydar? Who's Haydar? Ka'annahu, they were saying, Haydar, Haydar, Haydar. Figure out, who is he? Where is he? Right? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I'm going to go into... He says, but at least color your beard. He says, listen, I don't need to color my beard. In my own words now, even if a lion gets old, a lion's still a lion. And when your sons are all lions, then a lion shows the sons who the lion is. Why? Because his mother named him Haydar. Now watch and see. They say Amir al-Mu'mineen's sword comes out. Dhul Fiqar comes out. He gets on a white horse, white beard, white hair. Sword comes out. In the tradition it says Ali looks towards his horse and says, you need to take me to the very end and take me back again. Haydar's sword is here, and he goes from one end to the other and he comes back. People say, Mawla, you didn't even move your sword. Heads were falling one by one by one. Why don't I say this? Ali was trying to hold back the Dhul Fiqar because Dhul Fiqar had come into Jalal. You know, when you get into the discussion of Amir al-Mu'mineen, you go into the state of intoxication. This is why you notice that the Urafa, they go into a state of intoxication. I remember one great Sunni scholar of the 20th century. One day he was sitting opposite the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So one of his murids came, they said, why don't you pray 2 units of prayer? Why don't you do dhikr? Why are you just sitting there staring at the Zarifo? He says, don't you know the Prophet of God says, looking at Ali is ibadah? He goes, I'm looking. I'm intoxicated. Ali is Ali. Right? It takes you into a weird state. It takes you into a weird state. But look, inshallah, I'm thinking we'll carry on our discussion tomorrow. You know, tonight is a heavy night. I don't even know where to start. Tonight the cradle of Ali Asghar is going to come. I know many people have aqeedah on this. Many people have come from far away. Many of our Sunni sisters have come because they want to do their mannats or whatever it is. I'm going to recite slowly. For whoever has come, Shia, Sunni, whatever it is, go, do what you need to do. We're not here to stop anyone. This is the caravan of Ishq. I'm going to recite slowly. But before I do, I want to give you an eyewitness account of what I remember took place in Qom. Many years ago, I say many years, probably about, now it's 2007, so good 14 years ago or so. There was an Indian student, Tulab from Hind. His child became sick. So we remember he took his child to Bimaristan Gulpegani, the hospital which is over there. The child happened to die in the hospital. We still remember when he was coming back, he was walking on a street. He would go to the door, then walk back to the top of the street again. He'd walk to the door, he'd walk back to the street again. So we asked him, said, why don't you go inside of your house? He says, I don't know how I'm going to face the mother of this child Because when she sent him, he was Salim. And now that he's coming back, he's dead. Sometimes I used to think to myself, why did Sayyid al-Shuhada walk 7 times? And every time he walked, he would be saying, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Radan biqadaihi wa tasliman li-amr. What is Hussein doing? Why is he walking? Hussein knows he's going to have to face a mother. That mother, when he left, right, what did he say? He says, I'm going to bring it some water. Allah bless your tears. Look, these nights are going. You have no shimmer to stop you today. Every time Rabab wanted to cry, somebody would come and whip her on the back. There's no one to stop you today. No one is. Just remember how much of a madhluma this woman was. Can I give you a tradition just to emphasize how madhlum she was, how much of a madhluma she was? When they came for Arba'in, right? This hamla, this caravan of Ish came for Arba'in. They say Rabah was sitting next to the grave of Imam Hussein. Imam Sajjad comes, says, Mother, let's go home. She replies, she son, leave me here. What have I got to go home to? Says, my daughter is buried in Sham. My son is buried here. What am I going to do if I go back to Medina? Son, leave me here so that I can say to the Zawar of Hussein, this is the qabr of Hussein. There shouldn't be anyone who doesn't have a tear in their eyes, because if you don't have affinity to Hussein, you've got children at home as well. You've got daughters, you've got sons at home. Your small innocent child. Allah accept your du'as. I said I'm going to recite slowly because I'm not even coming onto the musibah yet and you're crying. I'm going to recite slow. I don't have the power, I don't have the strength. This is one of the heaviest masaib that you can recite. You know, this is so heavy that they say Sayyid al-Shuhada prayed 2 units of prayers when Ali Asghar was killed. You know why that was? It was heavy for him. There's only 2 times in the entire Karbala he becomes so heavy that he prays like this. One was when Ali Asghar. Why? He needed help. He needed that help. He needed the divine. Why? It's not easy when a 6-month-old baby is in front of you. Let me give you one more tradition. When Hurmala was bought by Mukhtar, before that Abu Khaliq was bought, Mukhtar says to Abu Khaliq, he says, was there ever a time when the army of Yazid cried? You know Abu Khaliq replied? He said there was one time when the army of Yazid cried. It said when? It said when Hussein brought a very small baby onto the maqtal. He said he'd wrapped it in like white cloth that it looked like a coffin. And when he pulled it out, we thought it was going to be a Quran. But when we took out the small baby, what we saw was this, that the baby put his tongue out. The minute it put his tongue out, the entire army of Yazid turned his back and began to cry. So at that point, then Mukhtar said, Hurmala, what did you do? Hurmala says, I fired 3 arrows. All 3 of them hurt the heart of Fatima. Said, what was it? He said, one was when Abbas had water in his mouth. I was the one who fired the arrow on the water. Abbas's life went just there. Second arrow I fired was when Hussein was on his horse. He was moving left to right. I fired the arrow that went into the mouth of Hussein that led to Hussein falling onto... But there was another arrow that I fired when a 6-month-old baby was... You know what the tradition says? It says 9th of Muharram came, a mother is holding a 6-month-old baby, and she's just saying one thing. She's saying, Ali Asghar, I'm not from Banu Hashim. Ali Asghar, I'm worried tomorrow that somebody may say, because of my milk, you didn't go and sacrifice yourself. Ali Asghar, a time is going to come tomorrow. If your father needs to help him, my son. Look, I can't recite anymore, but the one thing I will say is this. A time came when your Gharib Mawla was standing alone. Your Gharib Mawla, your Madloom Mawla, your Adshan Mawla. Thirsty Hussein looks left. In the tradition it says, وَنَذَرَ يَمِينَ وَالشِّمَالِ. He looked from one side to another. Everything was empty. He just said one thing. هَلْ مِن نَاس? Is there anyone to help the haram of Rasulullah? They say the women began to cry. Sayyid al-Shuhada's Ghayur is Ghayra couldn't take it. He says, Zainab, why do you cry for when your brother is still alive? She says, the reason is this 6-month-old baby has chucked itself out of the cradle. Says this 6-month-old baby has chucked itself out of the cradle. You know what happens? Sayyid al-Shuhada goes in, takes the baby in his hands, says to Rabab, maybe I can get some water. He says, Rabab, go into the other tent. Even Hussein knew this was going to be painful. Takes the baby, white cloth is there. Puts the baby in, puts kafan over it. If I can say just one thing, when he was tying the Imam of Ali Akbar, it was as if the Prophet was tying Amir al-Mu'mineen's head. But they say when he was tying this cloth over, tied the cloth, look, I can't even say it, tied the cloth, picked him up. As he was walking out, a small 4-year-old girl comes and just says one thing, Father, where are you going? Says, I'm going to go and make sure that this 6-month-old baby has some water. Says, I'm going to give it some water. Says, I'm going to go and give it some water. You know what happened? At that moment, now listen from the army of Yazid. Hormala now says, he says, I saw Hussein coming out. Gharib Hussein, you could see he was tired. He was tired, he came out. We thought he was bringing the Quran out. He was covering something. Later on, we realized he was shielding a baby from the sun. That Hussein comes forward and says, he says, oh army of Yazid, if you have a problem with me, what's this 6-month-old baby? You feed it. Hussein picks up the baby. He puts the baby on the ground. They say Ali Asghar was such, like you take a fish out of water. It was moving. It was opening his mouth, closing his mouth, opening his mouth, closing, like a fish out of water. They say at that moment it starts moving its lips. Ali Asghar's jihad begins. The sword comes. Dhul-Fiqar was the tongue. Its lips were so dry. The baby was moving its... At that moment, Umar ibn Sa'ad comes forward and says something. He says, Hormala, Iqta kalam al-Hussein, go and cut this baby. Hormala drops the arrow once, drops the arrow twice. At that moment, Umar ibn Sa'ad comes. He says, if I was to be asked who the most shaqi person is, I would have said it was you. You can't even take out a baby. There was a wa'iz in Karbala who would recite. He would say that the baby was so small and the arrow was so big that when it pierced Ali Asghar's neck, Ali Asghar didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That's how small this baby was. When Umar ibn Sa'ad says, Hormala, why are you dropping the arrow? He says, the reason why I'm dropping is that every time I take an arrow out, I see a woman dressed in black come. And she says, Hormala, don't you have any children of your own? Look, I can't recite anymore. The tradition says when the final arrow was fired, they said Umar ibn Sa'd stands there, he says, I'm going to cover your vision. Final arrow was fired. Look, I can't recite anymore, but the tradition says as the arrow came, as it was going in the air, Hussein saw it coming. 3-pronged arrow that's used to take an entire... You know what the hadith says? It says, وَالظُّهَبَ مِنَ الْأُذْنِ إِلَى الْأُذْنِ. It basically says, the arrow came from one ear, came out the other ear. Arrow hits the chest of Hussein. Head begins to dangle. Blood begins to come out. Hussein looks to the ground, looks at the sky, rubs it on his face. Inna lillah wa inna ilayh. As Sayyid al-Shuhada comes back to the tents, a small 4-year-old girl was standing there. She says, Father, did my brother drink water? He says, Sakina, take your brother. Rabab was standing there 7 times. Hussein, look, I can't recite all of it. Just one thing I'll say. Turns around to Rabab and says, let's go to the back and dig a grave. Digs a small grave. Hussein puts the child in. Says, my grandfather Rasulullah said, it's mustahab to put some water. Rabab begins to cry. Drops of water begin to fall. 11th of Muharram comes. 71 heads are cut. Raised on a spear. Somebody comes to Shimmer. Says, where there was one body, Hussein was hiding behind. Rabab's arms are tied behind. Tradition says 3 horsemen begin to rise. Each one of them has spears in their hand. They hit the spear at the ground. Rabab looks up to Imam Hussein's body. She can't tell. Spear goes again at the... This mother prays. Final time, spear goes. Small body comes out. Shimmer walks forward. Cuts the small... Mata mein Hussein.
हाथों पे है नन्हा सा लाशाली असगर का हाथों पे है नन्हा सा लाशाली असगर का हाथों पे है नन्हा सा लाशाली असगर का शह देते हैं बानों को पुरसाली असगर का हाथों पे है नन्हा सा लाशाली असगर का शह देते हैं बानों को पुरसाली असगर का हाथों पे है नन्हा सा लाशाली असगर का ले जाइए मैदान में मौला मेरे बच्चे को लो मैंने बदल डाला कुर्ताली असगर का हाथों पे है नन्हा सा लाशाली असगर का हाथों पे है नन्हा सा लाशाली असगर का हल मिन की सदा सुनकर झूले से वो गिर जाना है दीन की नुसरत में जज्बाली असगर का हाथों पे है नन्हा नन्नासा लाशाली असगर का हाथों पर है नन्नासा लाशाली असगर का शह चूम के लाशे को खासिद से ये कहते हैं सुगरा की तमन्ना है बोसाली असगर का हाथों पर है नन्ना सा लाशाली असगर का हाथों पर है नन्ना सा लाशाली असगर का शह देते हैं बानों को शह देते हैं बानों को पुरसाली असगर का हाथों पर है नन्ना सा लाशाली असगर का
या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन छः माह का मुजाहिद सुए मैदान चला है माँ देख रही है छः माह का मुजाहिद सुए मैदान चला है माँ देख रही है छः माह चेहरा बड़ा नाजुक है बड़ी गर्म हवा है माँ देख रही है छः माह का मुजाहिद हुए मैदान चला है माँ देख छः माह का मुजाहिद सुए में है बहन तेरे सामने बाबा के हैं हालात अब शाम गरीबों को ही होती है मुलाकात मुड़ मुड़ के सकीना की तरफ देख रहा है माँ देख रही है छः माह का मुजाहिद सुए मैदान चला हुर मलने कमा खींची तो लर्जी ये ज़मीं है सामने खैयाम में नबी उसको यकीन है पर्दा बड़ी बेचैनी से खैमे का हटा है माँ देख रही है छः माह का मुजाहिद सोचा था कि जी लेगी वो यादों के सहारे उम्मत ने जला डाले हैं अरमान भी सारे असग़र तेरा झूला तेरा कुर्ता भी जला है माँ देख रही है छः माह काला हूँ मुँह पे मला है, माँ देख रही है। 6 माह का मुजाहिद सूए मैदान चला है। जालिम तुझे इस बात का एहसास नहीं है, 6 माह का बच्चा है ये अब्बास नहीं है। कम सिन अली असग़र से तेरा तीर बड़ा है, माँ देख रही है। 6 माह का मुजाहिद सूए मैदान चला है। ए हाजरा याकूब इब्राहीम के हमसे, सिर चांद से बेटे का चढ़ानो के सीना पर, पाबंद रसन फूल सी बेटी का गला है, माँ देख रही है। 6 माह ए मेरे बेज़ुबां तुम रह गए कहाँ, असग़र जिएगी कैसे तेरे बग़ैर माँ। है मेरे बेज़ुबां तुम रह गए कहाँ, असग़र जिएगी कैसे। चेहरा वो चांद जैसा, चेहरा वो चांद जैसा, कैसे बुलाए मास, जिएगी कैसे तेरे बग़ैर माँ। है मेरे बेज़ुबां गए कहाँ, जिएगी कैसे। क्या वक्त आ गया है बानों की बेकसी पर, गुर्बत पे तेरी मातम कैसे करेगी मादर। आदान बान दी है, आदान बान दी है, हाथों में रस्सियाँ माँ। ऐ मेरे बेज़ुबां तुम रह गए कहाँ, दुश्वार हो गया है गम में तुम्हारे जीना, अब खाली गोद जाके माँ क्या करे मदीना। मुझको वहीं बुला लो, मुझको वहीं बुला लो, ऐ लाल हो जहाँ से जिएगी कैसे तेरे बग़ैर माँ। आए मेरे बेज़ुबां तुम रह गए कहाँ, असग़र जिए कैसे तेरे बग़ैर माँ। सांसें तो चल रही हैं, जिंदा कहाँ रही हैं, माँ जिंदगी से अपनी आज़ादी चाहती है। मुश्किल कुशा हो तुम भी, मुश्किल कुशा हो तुम भी, खुलवा दो बेड़ियाँ जिएगी कैसे तेरे बगैर माँ ऐ मेरे ज़ुबान तुम रह गए कहाँ असगर जिएगी कैसे तेरे बगैर माँ जंगल में के बेटा आवाज गूंजती है ये सोच कर भी मादर मकतल में रो रही है लगता है दर्द से तुम लगता है दर्द से तुम लेते हो सिसकियाँ असगर तेरे बगैर माँ ऐ मेरे ज़ुबान तुम रह गए कहाँ असगर जिएगी कैसे ये उजड़ी गोद बेटा कैसे सुकून पाए हालत पे तेरी माँ की हंसते हैं शाम वाले दामन में है तुम्हारे दामन में है तुम्हारे झूले की लकड़ियाँ असगर तेरे बगैर माँ ऐ मेरे बेज़ुबान तुम रह गए कहाँ असगर
असगर में तेरी माँ हूँ आ जाओ चांद मेरे तेरी प्यास में बुझाऊँ असगर में तेरी माँ हूँ आ जाओ चांद मेरे तेरी प्यास में बुझाऊँ असगर में तेरी माँ हो मेरे लाडले कहाँ हो मेरे लाडले कहाँ हो सीने तो में लगा हो असगर में तेरी माँ हूँ आ जाओ मेरे तेरी प्यास में बुझ मैं तेरी माँ हूँ बेटा तुम्हारा कातिल मेरे सामने खड़ा है जाने क्यों हंस रहा है चादर भी लुट चुकी है मौके तना छुपाओ हंसे घर में तेरी माँ हूँ आ जाओ मेरे तेरी प्यास में हूँ तेरे झूले को सकीना रो रो के चूमती है तुझे घर में ढूंढती है तेरी मौत की खबर में कैसे उसे सुनाऊं हंसे घर में तेरी माँ आ जाओ चांद मेरे हंसे मैं बुझाऊं असगर में तेरी माँ मेरी जान जा रही है ये सोच सोच असगर इसे फूल से गले पर ये तीर कैसे झेला बहनों को क्या बताऊं असगर में तेरी माँ आ जाओ चांद मेरे तेरी प्यास अस्से गर्म न तेरी माँ हूँ नेज़े से गिर रहा है नन्ना ससर तुम्हारा दिल रोता है हमारा मेरे हाथ तो बंधे हैं सर के स्तना उठाऊं अस्से गर्म मैं तेरी माँ हूँ आ जाओ मेरे तेरी प्यास में बुझा अस्से गर्म में तेरी माँ झूले के साथ बेटा मेरे हाथ चल गए जालिम भी हंस रहे हैं तेरी आखिरी निशानी है किस तरह से बचाऊं अस्से गर्म में तेरी दे मेरे तेरी प्यास में बुझाऊं अस्से घर में तेरी माँ जब रात हो गिराने में हो जाएगा अंधेरा डरना नहीं है बेटा दादी के गीतों में से आने तुझे सुलाऊं अस्से घर आ जाओ चांद मेरे तेरी प्यास बुझाऊं अस्से घर में तेरी माँ हूँ
Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah, Assalamu alayka ya Ibn Rasulullah, Assalamu alayka ya Ibn Amirul Mu'mineen, wa Ibn Sayyid al-Wasiyyin, Assalamu alayka ya Ibn Fatimatu Zahrai, Sayyidat Nisa'al Alameen, Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Assalamu alayka ya Gharib al-Ghurba, Assalamu alayka ya Mu'in al-Dhufa wal Fuqara, Assalamu alayka ya Shams al-Shamus wa Anis al-Nafus, Ayyuha al-Matfoon bi-Arzatus, Assalamu alayka ya Sultan al-Arab wal-Ajam, Ya Abul Hasan Ya Ali ibn Musa Rida Raza bil Qadr wal Qada wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alayka ya Maulana ya Sahib al Asr wal Zaman al Aman al Aman al Aman min fitnat al Zaman. Assalamu alayka ya Sharik al Quran. Assalamu alayka ya Khalifat al Rahman. Assalamu alayka ya Mazhar al Iman. Assalamu alayka ya Imam al Ins wal Jan. Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajak wa salallahu makhrajak wa zahurak wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma